Hello, Frizzle fools! Imagine how many books Brandon Sanderson has written. You're probably thinking too low, because if you include all the novellas, it's like 60 plus. So I have almost read all of the books by Brandon Sanderson. There's a few handfuls of ones that are like in series that I chose not to continue and stuff, but there's also a handful of novellas that I am very interested in reading. So this video is a project where I am trying to read all of these little novellas that you've probably never heard of, and it seems like the general Brando Sando fandom doesn't super care about, but I am very intrigued by it and I'm excited to read. And the first one that I finished is called Defending Elysium. This acts as kind of a world-building foundation to the Skyward series. You do not have to read one to understand the other, and you can read them independently, because this one is really like hundreds of years and in a different galaxy than the eventual Skyward books, okay? And like I said, the short story serves more as a world-building foundation than like foundation to anything else. So let's talk about the world building a little bit. So this takes place in the sci-fi future where a phone company has become the most powerful organization in Earth's history and world. And this is because they have a monopoly on communication, specifically faster than light communication. And I think this world-building nugget and idea is so cool. You might imagine that it might be someone with the best government or economics or military that becomes the most powerful organization, but no, it's the one that has the monopoly on not only communication, but also on communicating with the aliens specifically and making treaties with them. And then we are following a man who is kind of a secret agent that works for this phone company as he's investigating a crime disappearance thing. So all of that, positive. I liked it. Now let's get into the negatives, because I definitely feel more negatives towards this book than positives. It's so interesting that this story was originally published in 2008. And if I'm interpreting the introduction to the story right, it might have been originally written in 2002. And so it's very early work in the canon of Brandon Sanderson, and you can tell. I definitely think the writing craft here is of lower quality than what he's been able to achieve now, which is super cool to see that progression. And I'm very happy that he has been able to improve his skills so much. But like, this book tries to knock down so many dominoes of like powerful moments that it doesn't really ever set up. Like, it's trying to make big statements about like, what does it mean to be a fully like civilized civilization? What does it mean to be at that peak maturity as a species and as a race? It tries to knock down that domino, but it never really sets it up. It tries to explore the ideas of like, what will faster than light travel look like, especially if it's all intertwined with like psychic abilities. I don't think it set it up well. It's really just like assuming that you have a big basis of knowledge of different theories of faster than light travel in sci-fi and fantasy works. And just like all of these little moments like that throughout the book of big things and small things where this novella is trying to have big payoffs in character, in plot, in theme, in ideas, but it never set up those, so there's nothing to pay off, you know? The characters are boring, the plot is boring and disconnected, and the world building is messy and confusing and unsatisfying. So, do I recommend Defending Elysium? No, not really. I think as a curiosity of seeing how far Brandon Sanderson's writing style has come, or as a curiosity because you're interested in the origins of faster than light travel in the Skyward universe, sure, it's fine, but like, I'm debating between 2 and 3 stars. I was gonna land on 3, but the more that I talk about it, the more I'm drifting to 2. So maybe 2 stars. Oh, you know what's another thing that totally drove me insane when I was reading this book? So I was telling you about this phone company, right? That's super popular. Guess what it's called? The Phone Company. Sometimes it's referred to as PC for short. And like, this world building detail drives me insane because it feels so lazy. It's mentioned at some point in the book that the phone company has a different name, like Bell Technologies, blah, 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 blah. It's never called that. It's just called the phone company, and it feels so unrealistic. Like, this would never happen in real life, that a company would just be referred to as the phone company, you know? Like, even if it was the most powerful one, it started with the name, people would keep referring to it as its name, even if it shifted over time. And every single time someone referred to it as the phone company, all serious, like, he's an operative of the phone company, I just laughed. Like, I could not take it seriously. So yeah, I think I am gonna land on 2 stars for Defending Elysium. The more that I think about various twists that weren't set up at all, or various things, and just like, yeah, that was not a well-constructed novella, but I am excited to read the next one and tell you about it. So let's jump to that. So we listened to the audiobook for Dark One together. It's definitely meant to be consumed as an audiobook because it is pretty much a crime podcast. this girl, she's a music history major, I think, is doing a project on this woman who disappeared, who was a prodigy violinist, cellist, one of those. And it is definitely a horror novel, and I love how it's co-written by Brandon Sanderson and Dan Wells, and I've read a good number of both of their books, and you could definitely feel both of their influences coming through, like half and half.
Dan Wells really does the mildly horror novel vibes really well.
And
then Brandon Sanderson does the, okay, now here's the nitty-gritty of how this magic system works really well.
And I felt like this succeeded much more in the Dan Wells-y parts than the Brandon Sanderson-y parts. Because this story, so she disappeared and everyone has forgotten about her in a supernaturally kind of intense way. Like even her own mother doesn't remember her. And now our heroine, who is the narrator of this podcast, is investigating this of like, is there a cult? Is everyone drugged with memory wiper drugs? And just trying to investigate like what happened to make everyone forget this woman, and also how and why did she disappear / was murdered. And then through that kind of discovers that the threat isn't only 30 years ago in the past when this woman was murdered, but still present now, and gets entangled with that. And like those creepy, it was very well done. I was getting chills. In the horror elements, especially in the middle of this book, it totally excels.
It was really good. And it's told in like a podcasty format, kind of like A Good Girl's Guide to Murder or Illuminae, kind of those vibes. So if you like those books, would recommend. It was very good.
I feel like where this book had its weaknesses, and I don't know if you would disagree with me here, I'd love to hear your take, was in the more Brandon Sanderson parts. They start getting into the nitty-gritty of like, okay, it's a magic, so what is this magic system? What's behind it? Where does it come from? Here's an info dump about the different worlds that this is in. I feel like it really undercut a lot of the horror feeling that this book is so expertly built by over-explaining and exploring it in a way that wasn't satisfying.
A little, because this is a series or something? Or
there's
like an
a graphic
something?
novel that's connected to it.
And so I feel like the graphic novel or something like that would be a really excellent place to go into the details of the magic system. And this book should have been more, well, I mean, it did a great job focusing on the mystery. But I don't think it needed to go as much into Mirandus and all of that.
Yeah, I really felt like when it started being like, I'm from another world, and I have some vague magical ability that I'm not going to tell you about, and here's a quirky character that you might recognize from the comic, I assume. I haven't read it. Like, that's where I started getting really bored. Just so disconnected from everything else that had been in the book so far, and so jarring in tone.
So yeah, that part was a little weird. Overall, it was really good.
It was.
I think you can kind of put together the main plot twist pretty early. Of like, what happened to the girl? Why don't they remember her?
But I feel like being able to guess the answer to all of these questions doesn't make it any less creepy. It makes it even more so. Because you're waiting for the penny to drop for the characters, for them to realize it's a supernatural explanation. Because you know going in there is one. Right? It's a horror novel. But it takes a while for the characters. Exactly. But it takes a while for the characters to come to that conclusion. And that suspense, I feel like, is really well done. So what do you want to give this book, star rating wise?
3 or 4.
That's about where I'm landing too. I'd say the beginning, middle portion, 4 stars. The ending
stumbles a bit.
3 stars. Stumbles quite a bit when it gets into all these nitty gritty world building that really undercuts everything.
I also wish that the extra bonus character at the end was kind of unreliable. I wish they had leaned more into him being unreliable, because he said something and you're like, okay, obviously this isn't true. And then it turns out to not be true, but no one ever really addresses that. They're just like, oh, great.
And they still trust everything else.
And they still trust everything else.
Yeah. So I think if you like the horror podcasty vibe, would recommend. But yeah, not perfect, most definitely.
Yeah, it was good though.
We also then listened to the audiobook for The Original, which is another collaboration with Mary Robinette Cowell, I think. We've been listening to a bunch of these audiobooks all together. As you can tell, we are on a road trip right now.
Lots of driving.
6
hours yesterday, 8 hours today, more driving tomorrow.
We're a little burnt out on driving, but the audiobooks can be good.
Yeah.
The Original.
This one was not the best.
If it hadn't been like the audiobook that I had downloaded and didn't have anything else really locked in, ready to go, I think I would not have finished this book because it was really boring, which is such a shame because the world and the ideas are so cool. Let me tell you about them. It's a sci-fi world where everyone has nanites and then they can like change the way that they perceive the world through like themes. Like if you wanted everything to be pink all the time, you could have that. We are following the perspective of a clone, and she has been made in order to track down and kill her original original. Her original killed someone, and now it's her job to go track down her original and kill the original. And if she doesn't do this, the clone will die in a few days. It's a weird justice system quirk.
Sounds like a mystery, because the clone has most of the memories leading up to a certain point.
But not the memories of the actual murder
doesn't
and
remember
event.
the murder and the events leading up to it. And so she's like, this seems weird. Why would I kill this person? That doesn't make any sense. This has to be, I was framed. There's gotta be. And then it's like figuring out details and putting everything together and stuff.
A large portion of this book is also that the clone doesn't have like the theming. So it's kind of this woman for the first time in her life seeing the world without any filters. And then she's coming to a lot of realizations about how fake her world was, you know, how she wants to be living. And I feel like this novella was trying to do so much with world building, with themes, with this and that, and like none of it worked. None of it really landed. Like even there was a powerful moment where she realized that like so many parts of her relationship with her husband had been a fake in this way or that way, and it was just like, whatever. I feel like one of the, like, structurally you could look at this book and say, you know how like in the hero's journey you've got like, you're in the ordinary world and then you're broken out and you're in the special world and you're discovering all these things that are different. It's like this book existed entirely in the special world. I feel like if we had even gotten a few chapters of her before all of these events, really seeing what her life was like, it could have been so much more powerful when she realized that all that was a lie. Because we never got that, like, it was just all new to us as the reader. Everything was weird sci-fi, so did it really matter to us when it was this weird sci-fi versus that weird sci-fi? You know?
Like the first couple of chapters had been the most recent memories that the clone had, and then it stops, there's a time skip, the clone wakes up, and then it's like, oh, it's a clone now. What happened?
Yeah,
and
that could have been so much better. It's such a short novella. It's like a 3-hour audiobook, and it could have,
really
if
quick.
it was like twice the size, I feel like it could have had room to tell a story. But additionally, like, beside everything, just like the world building being confusing and not landing, I feel like it was also really poorly paced and just boring. Like, it's a life or death chase of hunting down someone to kill them, and yet, like, I was just consistently bored through the entire thing. And I think a lot of that is like, it doesn't give the reader enough pieces to understand what's going on. Like,
Yeah, I think I zoned out towards the end.
like for 99% of this book, the clone is just kind of wandering around, seeing things. And the clone doesn't ever really have a goal. Like, she's vaguely trying to find her original, but her heart isn't in it, because she doesn't know if she actually wants to kill her or not. Or she wants to go, like, find out things about the world, but then, like, she's not proactive about that either. She's just stumbling into things. It's just a story of someone stumbling around in a world that is interesting, in a situation that's interesting, but because there's no drive of anticipating what's coming next, or any like goals for the clone to fail or succeed at, like, it's so hard to get invested in her story.
Kind of because of that, a lot of the other set pieces didn't really get the time they needed to shine. Like a group of people would show up, they're like, hey, we're this group of people and we want this to happen, and you're like, oh, okay, why does that matter? Oh, you're terrorists? Okay, why does that matter? Oh, you're the different terrorists? Why are you different? And why does that matter? Because the clone doesn't care, and so you don't care.
And then you never got to see the world without, like, these terrorists, or, like, what they're even fighting against, so then why does that even matter either? If this had been a longer novella, if the protagonist had been a lot more active, and if we had gotten an intro where it was more of the normal world before the whole cloning thing happened, this could be a solid 4 stars for me. As is, I think it's best it can do is 2 stars.
I don't know what I'd give it. I was kind of bored. Maybe that means 2, but I don't know, 2 or 3. I'm a lot more generous than she is.
Stay tuned for future check-ins, because we have more audiobooks of Brandon Sanderson novellas that you've never heard of to go for this road trip.
I'm excited for some of them.
We're in the middle of the next one.
Yeah.
We'll give you the reviews when we finish it.
It's been pretty good so far. We'll see how it ends.
Hello, welcome to the new location brought to you by road tripping and flights. Lots of travel in the past few days. And I finished another Brandon Sanderson novella that you have probably never heard of, and it is Snapshot. So this, like many of Brandon Sanderson's novellas I'm coming to understand, is in a sci-fi near future kind of setting where there's this nebulous power that the government has achieved where they can recreate a day in a kind of simulated reality. Then they use this to solve crimes, where if you committed a crime on a certain day, they can simulate that day, put some real detectives in the simulation to actually witness you doing the crime. The focus of the story is we're following 2 detectives as they find evidence for the case that they're sent into the simulation to find, and start uncovering a larger, much creepier serial killery case along the way and start investigating that against the wishes of their higher ups. And this is definitely one of the better Sanderson novellas that I would definitely recommend. Though the mystery isn't as strong, there's some really interesting twists, like several of them in this book. Some of them I saw coming and some of them I didn't, and I think all of them made me go, oh, what? Fun. And definitely give me a lot to think about even after I finish the novella. There's a lot of like metaphysical exploration of, even though these people are kind of like magically simulated people inside of the snapshot of the day, in what ways do they actually count as real people? And just all these little questions like that, they give you little philosophical nuggets to chew on as you get to follow these detectives on the case. Super fun. I will say that there were a few things about this book that frustrated me. I don't feel like the characters were distinct enough or that I really got enough feeling for their personality along the way. The book was definitely more interested in the world building and the plot than the characters' journeys and arcs. Overall, I think I'd give Snapshot 4 stars and definitely say it's worth your time if you like detective, little sci-fi mystery action novels. We are done traveling for now.
Where are they going?
It is a moment of great celebration, and we have finished 3 more novellas. So this is Legion, books 1, 2, 3, all novellas. We're following a really interesting character. He's got kind of like a superpower, kind of like a mental illness, somewhere in between those. But it's kind of like if you took DID and schizophrenia and you mashed them together and also made it a superpower.
Mm-hmm. So he hallucinates people, and the people he hallucinates will have separate knowledge from himself. And so then he can he almost has all these different advisors in his head that have all this different knowledge about niche subjects, and so collectively they kind of know everything.
And they also help him through his emotional problems. And I think one of the things I really admired about the series is it's super detective novel focused, but also a little bit of sci-fi, and that's so fun. Like in the first book, he is hunting down a kind of sci-fi magic camera that can take pictures of the past that's been stolen. And then the second book,
at this point I kind of zoned out.
But they're really good. Don't worry, I was driving at the time when he fell asleep.
I'm just really bad with audiobooks.
I remember at the time thinking this plot was really cool, but it's been a whole 2 days and it has escaped me at this point. You gotta remember, we were doing road trips for like 3 days straight, so everything's a little bit of a blur, left somewhere in the middle of Montana. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the corpse disappeared.
So he's hired to find a body that was stolen because the body has scientific information encoded in its cells, and they're worried about that information getting out. And then in the third one,
I wasn't conscious for the whole one of this either.
It's
the VR
like,
one, right?
Yeah, there's like some VR things, and a lot of it is central around. There's this woman in his past who he's obsessed with because she helped him find his sanity, debatably, named Sandra. In the entire book series, he's trying to find Sandra, and then in this book, the final book of the trilogy, he finally finds Sandra, and everything kicks off from there.
Of course, in my opinion, though, as someone who didn't actually listen to the whole series, the individual plots of the books aren't really what makes them as good as they are. It's more about Legion himself and all of the aspects, he calls them, that are inside his head, how he deals with them, and then over the series, how his, what's the word for measures that you take to make sure it's working. Like, he starts to come undone.
And then he has to find new coping mechanisms.
That's the one.
But definitely the mysteries in themselves, I think, are also solid. I think I would give book 1 4 stars, book 2 4 stars, and book 3 3 stars.
I thought they were all great, but
you also slept through like half of 2 of them.
I did. But they were really good.
They were really good. I think of all the ones that I've read so far, these would be my favorites and the most widely recommendable. They've got a really interesting concept, it's explored well, and they've got interesting mysteries to boot. I think the longer I read series of Sanderson's, the more I'm disappointed in the way that he pulls off finales. I feel like it's a pattern across a lot of his different series that the final book will be so focused on weird world building things and trying to pay off a lot of those mysteries instead of paying off character beats or plot beats that have been set up throughout the series. Here in Legion, I think the Reckoner series does that. The Skyward series trends to that. Mistborn Era 2, arguably also Mistborn Era 1. We'll see about Stormlight Era 1. But yeah, I think a lot of his finales I find the worst of the bunch. I felt like in Legion, it got really bogged down at the end, where he was all falling apart, and that was a really powerful character moment of he's falling apart, how is he going to rebuild this? But then I feel like it really got bogged down with the VR and the Sandra plot, which didn't end up being compelling, I think, either. Especially because the VR plot became so much world building about like the mechanics of how this is working and how that's working and how he can manipulate it because of this thing and that thing, and like, I was not as enthused by the third one, but still pretty good. And if you're looking for one recommendation so far, it's this one. We'll see how that pans out when I read more in this video.
Yeah, it was really good. I think I'd give them 4 or 5.
If you're looking for more of kind of like an own voices review, I saw a really good review by Tori Talks, where she talks about how she has DID and how she relates to the character in this book. So if you're more curious, I would definitely recommend watching her review, and I'll link it down in the footnotes. Okay, how are we doing here? My phone is currently balanced on a stack of books and a desk because I don't have access to a tripod right now. So hopefully everything here stays stable. The next Brandon Sanderson novella I read was called Firstborn. This one had a sci-fi kind of space opera setting where we're following a guy who is a duke of a space empire, and the emperor wants him to be a tactician commanding fleets of battleships, etc., and he is really bad at it. He's never won a battle. And he's got a lot of angst attached to this because his older brother, who he's not close to at all, has never lost a battle, is the hotshot commander of the emperor. And then the plot of this novella has him getting the assignment to study and learn from his brother, and that puts him and his brother into closer and closer orbits until they finally intersect. And things happen. I didn't really care for this novella. It's one of the shortest ones that I read for this video, and the pacing was just off. Like, it felt like we had so much more page time devoted to world building that we needed, and so much not enough pages devoted to the emotional journey of this character. But I didn't have enough investment in the protagonist when we got to like the twist, or when we got to his successes and failures throughout this book. I didn't really care because I didn't care about him. This book sure has a premise, the brother that has never won a battle and the brother who has never lost a battle in dynamic conflict between each other, but I think it was lacking a solid execution. But at least I was not bored. Though I wasn't exactly hooked by this book, I was entertained the whole way through, so I'm giving Firstborn 3 stars. I then read Perfect State, another sci-fi novella. This one takes place in a Matrix-like world where everyone is stored in pods and then they get a computer simulation world in their heads to entertain them. And we're following a man as he comes into conflict with kind of the idea of the Matrix and the mods of the Matrix, because the mods are like, you need to reproduce, go find a real woman in the simulation somewhere, which is a weird premise. Anyway, but then as he goes off and does this, he starts to question, why am I following the mods anyway? And is anything in this simulation actually my choice? Or is it all being manipulated by the overlords? Again, I felt like this book was trying to juggle a little too many world building balls in the air. Like, we have the structure of this Matrix world. We also have the fantasy simulation that our character's in, which has its own magic system. And then as he's going around, he visits other Matrix worlds that all have their own aura, and we've got like our 1920s gangster, etc. So a little too much. I don't think we needed to try to also explain a magic system on top of all of these sci-fi concepts, but Brandon Sanderson tried to do it anyway. What I do think that this novella succeeded at was the character's journey throughout this book. I felt like this arc was actually strong, where it's got a very nice beginning, middle, and end, where at the beginning our character is very comfy in his Matrix world, and then you get to see that slowly get dismantled as he's confronted with new ideas about how much of those successes he's so proud of are actually ones that he earned, or were they all just baby spoon-fed to him by the mods. So I definitely liked this one, and I'm gonna give it 3 stars. So let's talk about all of these novellas and the elements that I saw repeating through them and rank them from worst to best. So first, one of the things that I really appreciated about a lot of these novellas is that they were taking risks. I feel like if you pick up a Brandon Sanderson like Cosmere fantasy book, you know what you're getting yourself into, and yes, there's some variation there, but you know what you're getting. With these novellas, it felt like a larger range of genres, of ideas it was playing with, and tones, which I thought was really cool. You can really see Brandon Sanderson trying out new things in these little capsules of novellas. It's also interesting that there's a lot more expanse of genre here, where a lot of these were sci-fi and we had a horror one in here, when the mainstream Brandon Sanderson books are mostly high fantasy. Another through line through these novellas is that most of them have twists. Some of them are twists that I think are very well pulled off, and some of them are twists that you see coming, or some of them are twists that there's no way to see coming and there's like no clues leading up to it, but you can definitely see this novella formula coming through, where a lot of them have these interesting twists where you think one thing's happening and then at the end it gets you. And yes, some of Brandon Sanderson's longer novels like Mistborn Era 1 have good twists, but it feels very intentional in these novellas that a lot of them are revolving around twists. So let's rank these. The worst has to go to the original, 2 stars. Next would go to Defending Elysium. I also gave this 2 stars. It was less boring, but less well written also. Then Firstborn, gave it 3 stars. Next up, I would put Perfect State, also 3 stars. Then Dark One Forgotten, which I was so close to giving 4, but I think in the end I've landed on 3, mostly because I didn't find the ending satisfying. Then the 3 Legion novellas, which makes a very solid trilogy, and I would definitely recommend these. And then at the very top, my personal favorite would be Snapshot, which I would also recommend. But I think if I was making one recommendation from all of this that I think you're gonna like, probably Legion would be the most well-liked by the average person. So there it is, 9 total novellas from Brandon Sanderson, and you probably hadn't heard of quite a few of these before we started this video. Thanks for watching.